I'm definitely standing up because those seats were designed for tiny people. So my name's John, and I put a ball in a hole for a living. I'm the cynic. I'm the realist of the group. I'm the one that tells you that, whoa, wait a minute, adding a ball to an urban environment doesn't necessarily create peace. Putting in a field some goalposts and supplying a community support officer doesn't necessarily make fat children thin and bad children good, that we have to actually make that happen. We talk about the big events in people's lives, and then sometimes we forget that when we are doing initiatives that work with young people, every single interaction is a massive event. With the right people in place, teaching sport, teaching beyond sport in the right way, these interactions are like the little opening ceremony every day. They literally see fireworks with every interaction. It can be remarkable. When we just leave sports to its own devices, it's a bit of a supertanker. You know, what we fill it with is what it's full of. And if we fill it with nothing, if we just say, sport, it's great, then kids get almost nothing out of it. So I want to take my time, I suppose, to tell a few stories, because frankly, I wasn't as good as Bob. I was a very average NBA basketball player, because I'm not really much of a sports fan. I never have been, probably never will be. I will be commentating for the BBC for basketball, but I put on a good show. I want to say first that I've had a lot of fun participating in this conference, and I think it's important that I mention the safeguarding conference that went on kind of within this. Because, as I say, every interaction with young people is a huge event, a major event. We've got to make sure that those interactions are universally positive. And I think sometimes we fall into a trap of thinking because we think sport is good, because we think sport is always good, that any time you put kids in sport, that'll be good. And we forget that out there's research that suggests that 76% of participants in sport experience emotional harm. We forget that, people talk about how great sport is, and then I often wonder, do we not remember back to the playground? Who gets picked? And who gets pushed to the sidelines? I was the fat kid. I was the goalie. I think they worked on the theory that I would take up enough space between two cardigans that the ball wouldn't go through. So we've got to really be mindful of the fact. And one of the messages that I think they would want me to give to you is that it is all our responsibility to make sure that sport doesn't just do no harm, but delivers on some of the promises that it makes. And it makes huge promises. When you think about the magnitude of promise versus the ratio of return, it's almost Lehman Brothers-esque in terms of its size. Big, big promises. And it's time that we made sure it returned. And we can do that by making sure that the right people are involved. But I'm not a total cynic. I have been involved with basketball for a long time, and with sport for a long time. I started basketball at age 17. I walked down Market Street in Manchester. I had just been to Greg's, which for the English people in here you'll know is very healthy food. And I had a steak slice in my hand. Fat all around my face, flakes of pastry over my front. And I was about to take another bite, and a tiny man came up to me. You're all tiny. And a tiny man came up to me and said, kind of poked me in my soft, squishy side and said, you should play basketball. And to this day, I don't know why I said, okay. Because for your benefit, I was the kid who hid in the corner of the library, reading an Asimov book or a Hardy Boys, even though they were all the same. I was that kid. I was the kid who forged notes from my mother, who was a GP actually, to get out of sports day. Yeah, John is sick. He has a broken knee. He'll be fine on Thursday. So for me, it's a real anathema. Why did I say yes? I'm not sure, really, but what's amazing about that, we talk about big events, and that was a huge event in my life. Because all of a sudden, I can look back to a point in my life where my universe split. I had a life path forward that would have meant me as a, hopefully considerably larger, fatter, chubby psychologist from Manchester who never played basketball. But because I said okay that day, my universe split. And all of a sudden, this new pathway was possible. Amazing stuff could happen. 6 or 7 days later, I was in another gym. I'd been told to go to this gym in Chorlton, and I walked through the door, and I dipped my head and walked in, and then everything stopped. And I'm quite used to that, because that's what normally happens when I walk around anyway. People stop and they point, and like I'm on top of the Empire State Building swatting planes or something. But this time it was different. This time it was different. Everything stopped, and then suddenly people rushed towards me, and they said, well, you can be on our team. You can be on our team. And I said, quite loudly, because I wanted them all to be sure, you realize that I've never played this game before. There's nothing genetic about being able to put a ball in a hole. They said they didn't care. So I was terrible, truly awful. But they looked at me, and it was amazing, because it was the first time somebody looked at me and that I could see my own potential in their eyes. And that's one of the great things we can do with sport. We can help people see the things within them that they have not yet discovered or have been afraid to look at. And that's what basketball did for me. I decided 6 weeks after starting playing basketball that I was going to play in the NBA. I thought that seemed like a good idea. I thought, might as well do it. And then people started telling me that's impossible. And I'm contrasuggestive, so I thought, right, now I have to do it. So I got a book, and I found the names of schools, high schools in America, because I knew I wasn't good enough to go to college straight away. That's an understatement of the universe. And I found this book with high school names, and I started writing letters. And I wrote 3,000 letters, because this was before email. And I was about to send them, and suddenly kind of reality struck. This is so stupid. I'm 17 years old. Most of the people who play basketball have been playing since they were 4. They have real coaches in America. We don't. Didn't. Maybe don't. And I thought, this is just impossible. And then I went to my mom, and I had this little crisis. And, because my path had been clear. I was going to be a psychologist. Chubby psychologist in Manchester. No problem. And I said to her, this is just stupid, right? This is impossible. And she looked at me, and she said, it's certainly a difficult path, son. I love my mother's talent for understatement. And then she said, but the most unlikely of people in the most improbable of circumstances can be extraordinary. Okay. And I went back downstairs, and I got those letters, and I put the stamps on, and I sent them off, and I waited, and I got 3 replies. 2 from Toledo, Ohio, and 1 from Roanoke, Virginia. And I thought all of those places would essentially be some combination of Knight Rider and the A-Team in terms of what they'd be like. I ended up randomly picking Toledo, Ohio, being slightly underwhelmed with what I found when I got there. But that was the start of my basketball journey. 6 years later, after sending those letters, 6 years later, after starting basketball at the age of 17, I walked onto the court starting for the Cleveland Cavaliers. It was a particularly bad year for the Cleveland Cavaliers. But nonetheless, I kind of did something that I promised. And every time I stepped on the floor at that time, what kind of started me off, what fueled me, kind of came back to my head. The idea that when I ducked my head to walk through that gym, my friends around me, those first teammates looked at me, and for the first time, they saw potential. And then I saw it too. Last thing I'll say before because I'm going too long, I will say this. Everyone likes to talk about their children. I'm a granddad. Fantastic looking granddad at this stage. But, thank you, you're welcome. I would say, talk about how sport can inspire these monumental events. When I got to Orlando, the Magic, they were my glory days, actually, surprisingly. And the Magic, when I first got there, they weren't sure they were going to keep me. Amongst many reasons, one of the primary ones was that I was English. And they thought, English basketball player, really? No. But they kept me anyway. And at the beginning of the year, I didn't have access to the whole gym. They had this amazing place that was half public, half private. But the private part, you had to scan your hand to get in, and they didn't give me that. So I could practice with the team, but not on my own. So on my own, I went to the open gym. And I would go there every day and do my routine, because I knew I needed to get better. And I walked in the gym one day, it was about 1 in the afternoon, and I looked down the other end of the court, and there's 2 kids, 10, 11, shooting around. And I look at them, and the first thing I think is, you should be in school, right? And then they gave me that look. I looked at them, and they gave me that look. You know, the look that kids give you when they say, you know, I'm not going to come up and talk to you, but if you want to talk to me, that's cool. That look. So I went up and talked to them, and I said, you should be in school, right? And like, nah, we're good. I said, okay. They introduced themselves. Hi, I'm Chris. Hi, I'm Eric. Hi. Shot around a little bit, went back, finished my routine, came back the next day. There they were again. I went up to them. Chris, Eric, how you doing? Good? You should be in school, right? Nah, we're good. A long story short, I ended up adopting these kids. Over the course of the year, I got to know them, I got to know their circumstances, which was difficult, and I ended up adopting them. And that was an amazing experience. Talk about a pivotal moment for me. And then a few years ago, one of my kids, my youngest Chris, came up to me and he said, do you know why we chose you? And I said, of course I know why you chose me. I was an NBA basketball player. How cool is that? And he said, absolutely deadpan, you weren't that good. And I said, okay, all right. So why did you choose me then? And he said, do you remember the first day you met us? And I said, yeah, I remember that. You should have been in school, right? He said, yeah. He said, remember the second day you met us? I said, yeah, of course I do. He said, well, the second day you met us, you remembered our names. That was it. Tiny, tiny moments. We talk about the big things, the major events. Sometimes it's these tiny moments that we can create through sport and through other things, but we need to be really careful with how we create them in sport that can change people's worlds forever. I'm a moderately thin granddad at 40-odd. Never thought it could happen. These things, these moments can make people's universe change. The whole path of people's lives radically alter forever. That's what we need to harness with our sports, with our interventions. We need to purposefully make this happen so that every young person that we intervene with, that we use sport with, has that moment they can look back on when a life that was sloping downwards and out of control suddenly splits away and rises. Thank you.